The town of Willow Creek had never seen anything quite like it. The morning sky was overcast, casting a somber gray light over the gathering. Families dressed in black, their faces filled with grief, whispered in hushed tones as they arrived at the small cemetery. The girl, Emma, had been taken too soon, leaving behind a community that was struggling to comprehend the loss. As the service began, the air was thick with sorrow, but there was one presence among the mourners that stood out. Max, Emma's dog, sat beside the casket, unmoving, his large brown eyes fixed on the coffin with an intensity that sent chills down the spines of those who witnessed it. It was as if Max knew something they didn't, as if he understood that his role was far from over. Max had been with Emma since she was a child. They had shared everything: happy moments, difficult days, and even life-threatening medical emergencies. Emma had been diagnosed with a rare medical condition when she was very young, and Max was more than just a pet. He was her service dog, her protector, her constant companion. He had been trained to sense when her condition was deteriorating and to alert the family to take immediate action. Max had saved Emma's life more than once, his instincts sharp, his presence always a comforting, calming force in the storm of her health struggles. Now, with Emma gone, Max wasn't leaving her side. As the mourners gathered around the grave, some whispered in disbelief, others held back tears, and a few even stepped closer to comfort the dog. But Max did not respond. His eyes never left the casket. His posture was stiff, his head lowered as if he was still on alert. The small group of family members gathered around the grave couldn't bear to see the dog in such obvious pain, but no one could move him. He wouldn't budge even as the coffin was lowered into the ground. The officiant spoke softly, guiding the service, but his words seemed distant in the presence of such raw emotion. It wasn't just the loss of a girl. It was the loss of an inseparable bond between human and animal, a bond that defied the boundaries of life and death. Max's stillness grew more powerful by the minute, and as the final words were spoken, the crowd stood in a heavy silence. People shuffled slowly to their cars, unable to shake the image of the dog lying next to the grave. For those who had known Emma and Max, the scene would be etched into their memories forever. No one understood why Max remained there, guarding the grave as if on duty, but there was no denying the deep connection between the two. For Max, it seemed like he was doing exactly what he had been trained to do, protecting the girl he had loved and kept safe for so many years. As the last of the mourners began to file out of the cemetery, the deep rumble of motorcycle engines echoed through the town, a stark contrast to the quiet sadness that had settled over the grave. The sound grew louder, and soon a group of bikers appeared at the entrance to the cemetery, their leather jackets and roaring bikes unmistakable. Big Jake, the leader of the group, was the first to notice the dog. He had been a part of many memorials and community service events, but nothing quite like this had ever touched him. Max, the dog who had not left the grave for days, lay still at the foot of the casket, watching the bikers approach with a calmness that was almost unnerving. The rough and tumble bikers, many of whom had seen the darkest corners of the world, couldn't help but feel a strange connection to the scene. Big Jake, a man with a heart of steel and a past filled with battles, walked toward the grave, his boots crunching softly on the gravel path. He had seen loss, but the loyalty of Max, the dog who was clearly still on high alert, struck something deeper within him. He paused for a moment, sizing up the situation. His strong hands, usually gripping handlebars, now fidgeted with the brim of his worn cap. "Hey, buddy," Jake said softly, crouching down next to Max, trying not to startle him. The dog's ears twitched, but he didn't move. His brown eyes locked on Jake's, and for a brief moment, it felt as though the two were communicating in a silent exchange. Max's gaze wasn't fearful or defensive. It was simply watchful, alert, and intensely loyal. Jake couldn't help but feel a deep respect for the dog. The loyalty that flowed from Max seemed to transcend the situation. The other bikers, standing a few feet back, exchanged curious glances. This was no ordinary dog, and this was no ordinary funeral. Something was different here. "He's been here for days, hasn't moved an inch," one of them muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. They had seen all kinds of animals, stray dogs, horses, and cats, but this dog's devotion was unlike anything they had encountered before. Jake stood up slowly, his heart heavy with a new sense of admiration for the animal. "We've got to do something for him," he said, looking at the rest of the group. "I know we're here for the girl, but this dog needs to know that someone else sees him too." The bikers, whose lives were often filled with grit and tough exteriors, felt something stir inside them. A sense of protectiveness, not just for the girl they had never met, but for the dog who had stood guard at the grave, refusing to abandon his post. Big Jake looked at Max one last time before turning to his crew. "Let's give him something to show he's not alone." They gathered around, forming a circle with Max at the center. It wasn't much, but it was their way of showing respect. One by one, they laid down small tokens of tribute, a patch, a bandana, and a leather bracelet. These were symbols of honor in their world, and it seemed fitting to offer them to a dog whose loyalty had no bounds. The bikers spent the next few days in the small town, witnessing Max's unwavering vigilance beside Emma's grave. Despite the initial shock of seeing such devotion, something deeper began to stir within them. Big Jake couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than just a grieving dog. He'd seen plenty of animals mourn their owners, but it felt different. Max wasn't just mourning. There was a purpose to his actions, a sense of duty that no one could quite explain. Tina, one of the bikers, had spent time around service animals in the past and felt the need to dig deeper into the bond between Max and the girl. She was no stranger to loyalty, having served in the military before joining the biker crew, and she could see the silent promise in Max's posture. It wasn't just love, it was duty. She couldn't shake the thought that Max was still in work mode, as though he was guarding Emma even though she was no longer physically present. "Jake, we need to find out more about this girl," Tina said one evening as they sat around the fire after a long day. "There's something about this dog that doesn't add up." Jake looked over at Max, who was still lying next to the grave. The dog had not moved from that spot since the funeral, not once. "I agree. Something's off. This dog's loyalty goes beyond what we can see on the surface." The bikers decided to visit Emma's family the next day. They weren't sure what they were looking for, but they knew they needed answers. When they arrived at the small house, they were greeted by Emma's mother, a woman with tears still fresh in her eyes. She was hesitant at first, unsure of the bikers' intentions, but Tina, with her calm demeanor, spoke gently to her. "We're not here to intrude," Tina said, her voice reassuring. "We've been seeing Max at the cemetery, and we wanted to learn more about Emma and their bond. This dog, he's something special." Emma's mother hesitated before inviting them inside. She wiped her eyes, trying to keep composure, but it was clear she had been through hell. As they sat down, Emma's mother spoke softly, revealing parts of her daughter's life that had remained largely private. Emma had a rare medical condition, she said, her voice breaking slightly. She was diagnosed when she was only 5 years old. Max wasn't just her pet. He was her lifeline. He could sense when her health was in danger. There were times when he saved her life. When she had a seizure, he'd bark and alert us. When her heart condition worsened, Max would be the first to know, and he'd get us to her side in time. The bikers exchanged glances, realizing the depth of the connection between Emma and Max. The loyalty wasn't just emotional, it was physical, instinctive, and critical to Emma's survival. The bond between them was forged in life or death situations, and now, even in death, Max was still on guard. Emma's mother continued, her voice trembling. Max was always there, always watching over her. She didn't just love him, she needed him. The room grew quiet as the bikers absorbed the weight of Emma's story. They could now see it clearly. Max wasn't just guarding a grave. He was still in his protective role, looking after Emma as he had done for so many years. The bikers realized that Max had not simply been by her side. He had been trained to protect her in ways that were now beyond their understanding. His duty was far from over. The conversation shifted, and soon they learned that Max had been part of a service dog program that trained animals to detect medical emergencies and assist with daily needs. But this particular dog was exceptional. Max had been Emma's constant companion, not just providing support, but saving her life on more than one occasion. As they left the house, the bikers felt an overwhelming sense of respect for the dog who had stood guard for so long. It was clear to them now. Max's refusal to leave the grave wasn't just about grief. It was a promise, a bond that even death couldn't break. The bikers left Emma's house that afternoon with heavy hearts, but they also felt a renewed sense of understanding about Max's devotion. They knew the bond between the dog and the girl had been deeper than any of them had imagined. But the more they learned, the more they realized how extraordinary this connection truly was. Max wasn't just a dog. He was a lifeline, one that had been forged through countless moments of danger, love, and survival. Big Jake couldn't stop thinking about what Emma's mother had shared. He had seen dogs in action, working as service animals and companions, but he had never encountered one as dedicated as Max. This wasn't a story of simple companionship. This was a story of a bond that went beyond words, beyond simple affection. Jake, Tina said as they rode back to the cemetery the next morning, "I think we're missing something. This dog is more than just loyal. There's something else going on here. Max wasn't just trained to save Emma. There's more to it. He's guarding something." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "I know what you mean. It's almost like he's still on duty, like his work isn't finished yet." As they reached the cemetery, they found Max exactly where they had left him. He was lying in the same spot, next to Emma's grave, his eyes fixed on the headstone. There was no sign of movement, but the bikers could feel the dog's presence, the quiet, steady watchfulness that seemed almost supernatural. Tina approached cautiously, her hand extended toward Max. The dog didn't flinch, but his eyes never left her. She could see it clearly now. Max wasn't simply grieving. He was waiting. His body was taut, as if ready to spring into action at any moment. It was a strange feeling, one that Tina couldn't quite place. It wasn't fear. It was a sense of unyielding duty. "I think Max is waiting for something," Tina said, turning to the group. "I don't know what, but he's not moving because he's expecting something to happen. He's not done protecting Emma. Not yet." The bikers spent the next few days observing Max closely, trying to make sense of his behavior. They realized that every time someone approached the grave, Max would raise his head and watch them intently. But it wasn't just the grave he was guarding. It was the space around it, as though he were anticipating a threat or danger. It was as if the dog knew that Emma's passing wasn't the end of the story. Big Jake began to think back to the many situations he had encountered during his time in the service. He had seen soldiers who wouldn't leave their posts, even after the battle was over. There was a deep, unspoken understanding of duty, one that couldn't be ignored. And that's when it hit him. Max wasn't just guarding Emma's grave. He was guarding something deeper, something only he understood. Perhaps it wasn't just Emma he was protecting, but the promise they had made to each other. A promise that Max would never break, no matter what. "That's it," Jake said, a realization dawning on him. Max isn't just watching the grave. He's waiting for the right moment to let go, but he's not ready yet. The bikers sat in quiet reflection, realizing they were witnessing something profound. It wasn't just the grief of a dog who had lost his best friend. It was a sacred, unbreakable bond. A bond that had been built over years of trust and love. Max was honoring that bond in a way only he knew how. And they knew they had to help him find peace. The realization that Max wasn't just guarding Emma's grave, but waiting for something, some final moment of closure, hit the bikers hard. They could no longer just be bystanders to this extraordinary story. Something about Max's unwavering loyalty and his deep bond with Emma had sparked a sense of responsibility in them. They had witnessed something profound, and now they felt compelled to honor it, to show the dog that he wasn't alone in this vigil. Big Jake took charge, rallying the group for what they all knew had to be done. They had to give Max and Emma a memorial that celebrated the bond between them. But this wouldn't just be any memorial ride. This was going to be something bigger, something that captured the essence of loyalty, love, and sacrifice. It was going to be a tribute that not only honored Emma's life, but also recognized Max's silent, steadfast service. They decided on a memorial ride, but it wouldn't just take place in Willow Creek. The bikers planned a route that would span several towns, stopping at key locations where Max and Emma's bond had left its mark. They would share the story of the dog who had refused to leave his girl's side, the story of an animal who had given everything for the person he loved. The day of the ride, the bikers gathered at the cemetery early in the morning. The air was still cool and the sky was clear, but there was an undercurrent of anticipation that hung in the air. They could feel the weight of what they were about to do, the significance of the ride, the honor of the tribute, and the bond that had been forged between them and Max. Max, as always, was by the grave. His posture remained unchanged, but there was something in his eyes, a softness, almost like he knew the bikers were there for him. As Big Jake approached, he could see the faintest glimmer of recognition in the dog's eyes, as if Max understood the purpose of what was happening. "Ready, old buddy," Jake said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Max didn't respond, but he didn't need to. The connection between them was clear. This was about respect, not just for Emma, but for Max's role in her life. The bikers revved their engines, and the sound of roaring motorcycles filled the air. It was a powerful moment, one that echoed across the cemetery and through the town. Slowly, the group began their ride, weaving their way through Willow Creek, their hearts heavy but determined. As they passed by the townsfolk who had come out to watch, they saw people standing silently, watching with admiration and sorrow. The story of Max and Emma was now spreading like wildfire. The news outlets picked up the story, and soon people from all over were reaching out to learn about the bond between the dog and the girl. The riders became more than just bikers. They became ambassadors of Max's legacy, sharing the powerful message of loyalty and love. With every mile they rode, they felt closer to the truth of Max's unwavering dedication. The memorial ride was more than a tribute. It was a way for the town, and even the bikers themselves, to process the loss and honor the extraordinary bond that had existed between Emma and Max. It was a celebration of the love that had transcended life and death. As they returned to the cemetery later that evening, the bikers felt a sense of peace. Max remained there, as always, guarding the grave, but there was a subtle shift in his demeanor. He seemed less tense, less watchful. It was as though, in some way, he had been given the tribute he needed, the recognition that his duty had not gone unnoticed. For the bikers, the ride had been cathartic. It had allowed them to share in something truly special, something that reminded them of their own capacity for loyalty, love, and devotion. And for Max, it was a quiet promise fulfilled, that he had not been forgotten, and that his mission was complete. The memorial ride had been an overwhelming success, but there was a lingering sense that the story of Max and Emma wasn't finished yet. As the bikers packed up and prepared to leave Willow Creek, they all felt a strange pull to stay a little longer. It was as though something was still waiting to be uncovered, a final piece of the puzzle that had remained hidden all this time. Big Jake, now even more determined, decided to spend the night at the cemetery. He didn't know why, but he felt the need to be there, to watch over Max, who had remained a quiet sentinel by Emma's grave for days on end. As the sun set and the darkness crept in, the small town seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something extraordinary to happen. Tina, who had grown especially close to Max, joined Jake in the cemetery. The two of them sat in silence, their eyes fixed on the loyal dog who lay motionless beside the grave. The night was peaceful, with only the sounds of distant crickets and the occasional rustling of leaves breaking the stillness. It was a moment of calm before the storm, as if the universe was setting the stage for something profound. Then, without warning, Max lifted his head and stood up. His ears perked and his eyes narrowed as though he had sensed something in the distance. Jake and Tina exchanged glances, both feeling the hairs on the back of their necks stand up. "Do you see that?" Tina whispered. Jake nodded, his heart racing. A faint light, almost imperceptible in the moonlight, flickered near the grave. It wasn't a reflection or a trick of the eye. This light seemed to come from within the ground itself, pulsing gently, like a heartbeat. Max's gaze never wavered from the spot, and his body became tense, as if bracing for something. The bikers stood up slowly, unsure of what to do. They had witnessed the dog's loyalty, his solemn vigil, but this was something they had never expected. Could it be? Tina started, but she trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Before they could react, the light grew brighter, intensifying with each passing second. It was as though the earth itself was reacting to Mac's presence, as if something beneath the surface was being awakened. The ground began to tremble, just slightly at first, then more forcefully, as if something was pushing its way to the surface. Max barked suddenly, sharp and loud, snapping Jake and Tina out of their trance. He sprinted to the grave, standing over it protectively, his body vibrating with tension. It was clear that he recognized something they didn't, a presence, a force, something that had been buried deep beneath Emma's grave. Tina grabbed Jake's arm, her voice trembling. "We need to dig. Now." Jake nodded, his instincts kicking in. Together, they began to clear away the earth, their hands working quickly in the moonlit night. The tremors from beneath the ground grew stronger, and the light continued to pulse in time with the vibrations. They weren't sure what they would find, but they knew it was something important. As they dug deeper, they reached something solid, a small metal box. The light seemed to shine brighter now, emanating from the box itself. Max stood over them, growling low in his throat, as if warning them that they were getting closer to the truth. The bikers exchanged a look, their excitement palpable. What had been buried with Emma? And why had Max been guarding it all this time? The answers were within their reach, and they were about to uncover a truth that none of them had ever expected. The metal box gleamed in the dim moonlight, its surface covered in layers of dirt and time. As Jake and Tina carefully pulled it from the earth, Max stood rigidly beside them, his growls deepening as though warning them of what was to come. There was an eerie tension in the air, the kind that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand up. "What's inside?" Tina asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, as she brushed the remaining dirt from the box. Jake, his hands trembling slightly, reached for the latch. He had no idea what to expect, but the gravity of the moment made it clear that whatever was hidden here was not just for Max, it was for Emma. The box felt heavy, not just in weight, but in significance. It had been buried for a reason, and now the bikers were about to uncover its contents. With a soft click, the latch opened, and the lid creaked as Jake slowly lifted it. Inside, there was a folded piece of yellowed paper and a small, worn medallion that caught the light, shimmering faintly. Both objects seemed ancient, as though they had been untouched by time, but there was something undeniably powerful about them. The air around them seemed to hum, and Max's growling grew louder, more urgent, as if the dog could sense something profound in the objects. Jake carefully pulled the paper from the box. It was fragile, its edges frayed, but the writing on it was still legible. As he unfurled it, he found a letter, written in a neat hand, dated just a few months before Emma's death. His heart sank as he began to read. "To my beloved Max, if you are reading this, then you know that I am no longer with you. I've left this world, but I know you will continue to protect me, just as you always have. My dear friend, there is something you must know, something I never told anyone, a promise I made, one that you must fulfill. I have hidden the key to my legacy, a legacy that is not just mine but ours. It is in a place only you know, where you've always been. Protect it, Max. Protect it for as long as you live, and when the time is right, pass it on to those who can carry it forward. You have always been more than a dog to me. You've been my protector, my confidant, my family. Keep your promise, my loyal companion. I love you always." Jake's breath caught in his throat as he finished reading. His eyes flicked up to Max, whose posture had shifted. The dog was standing tall now, no longer growling, but instead staring intently at the medallion in Jake's hand. The letter was not just a message of love, it was a call to action. Emma had left something behind, something crucial, and Max had been guarding it all this time. The key mentioned in the letter was unclear, but it was clear that it was meant for someone else to find, someone who could carry it forward. Tina took a step closer, her voice low and filled with awe. This was Emma's final wish, her legacy. Max has been guarding it all this time. Jake nodded slowly, the weight of their discovery sinking in. But what is it? What's hidden here? What is Emma's legacy? Max, who had been quiet until now, took a step forward, gently nudging the medallion with his nose. He seemed to be guiding them, his actions almost deliberate. His eyes locked with Jake's, and in that moment, it felt as though the dog was urging him to continue. Whatever this legacy was, it was far more than just a keepsake. It was something that had been waiting for the right moment to be revealed. The bikers exchanged a look of determination. They had started this journey to honor Max's loyalty and Emma's life, but now they knew their mission had shifted. They weren't just here to witness a dog's devotion. They were here to uncover a mystery, to unlock a secret that had been buried for a reason. And with Max's help, they were about to take the first steps toward unraveling it. As the bikers stood in the moonlit cemetery, the letter in Jake's hands seemed to burn with an intensity that made everything around them feel distant. Max, who had remained silent until now, let out a soft whine as he watched Jake and Tina closely, almost as if he understood the weight of their discovery. The medallion in Jake's hand sparkled faintly, and the realization settled over the group. They had been entrusted with something important. Emma wanted us to find this, Tina whispered, her eyes fixed on Max. But why us? Why now? Jake carefully placed the medallion back in the box, his mind racing. The words in the letter were clear. Emma had hidden something of immense value, and it was meant for someone who could carry it forward. But the key to the legacy she mentioned remained elusive. There was more to this than just a sentimental gesture. This was a mission, a calling, and they had been chosen to uncover it. Max gave a sharp bark, as if urging them to move forward. His gaze never wavered from the spot where the box had been buried, and there was a sense of finality in his actions. Whatever Emma had left behind, whatever promise she had made to Max, it was now time for it to be fulfilled. "Let's follow him," Jake said, determination in his voice. He looked at Tina, and without another word, they both stood up. They knew what they had to do. Max trotted ahead, leading the way across the cemetery as if he had done this countless times before. His movements were purposeful, and though he seemed to have aged in the weeks since Emma's death, there was still a fire in his eyes, a resolve that couldn't be ignored. As they walked, the bikers were led to a secluded corner of the cemetery, near a row of ancient oak trees. The area seemed to hold a certain stillness, as though it was untouched by time. Max stopped by a particularly large oak tree, its gnarled roots snaking into the ground. The dog stood still for a moment, looking up at the tree before turning back to Jake and Tina. Without hesitation, Jake knelt down to inspect the roots. As his fingers brushed against the earth, he felt something hard, a small, hidden compartment. His heart raced as he cleared the dirt away. Beneath the roots of the tree lay another box, almost identical to the one they had already uncovered. "This is it," Tina said softly. "This is what Emma wanted us to find." With hands that were now steady from the journey, Jake carefully lifted the second box. The lock on it was old, rusted, but it gave way with ease. Inside was a series of documents, papers, photographs, and what appeared to be a ledger. At the very top of the pile was a small, leather-bound journal. The journal's cover was worn, and the pages within were filled with Emma's handwriting. But there was something else, something that made the entire discovery feel even more significant. Jake flipped to the first page, where a map was sketched out. It was an elaborate, detailed map, but it didn't just mark places. It seemed to chart a course, a trail. The markings on the map appeared to lead to locations far beyond Willow Creek, extending across the state, maybe even beyond. Tina leaned in. This isn't just a map. It's a guide. Emma had something to protect, something important, and she's been hiding it all this time. Jake looked at Max, who was watching them intently, his eyes reflecting an ancient wisdom. "It's not just Emma's legacy," Jake said, understanding the full extent of their discovery. "It's hers and Max's. It's something they both protected together." Max let out a soft sigh, his tail giving a gentle wag. It was as if the dog knew their mission was now clear, that the bikers had uncovered the truth, and now it was time to carry it forward. Emma's legacy, hidden for so long, was ready to be revealed to the world. The bikers, with Max by their side, knew their journey wasn't over. They had found the first step, a map leading to something far more significant than they could yet understand. Whatever Emma had hidden, it was up to them now to follow the trail, uncover the mysteries, and protect the legacy she had left behind. With the box and the journal in hand, they mounted their bikes. Max jumped into the sidecar, his place secured next to his family. The night was dark, but the path ahead was lit with the promise of discovery. The bikers revved their engines and rode off into the horizon, ready to honor the legacy of a girl and her dog, loyal beyond death, and now a mystery waiting to be solved.